Hey there, ProChurch Media community, this is Jason again. In this fun tutorial, we're going to look at how to create 3D photos for Facebook using Photoshop. It's a lot of fun, super simple, and gives you tons of creative things you can do with it, so let's get right to it. Okay, so when you're looking for an image to use for this type of effect, there are a couple things you want to look for. First off, you want to look for an image that has some natural depth built into the image, and so basically, you can see in this one we have the foreground subject here, and then there's a lot of depth between the foreground subject and the background, and so that natural depth helps to kind of sell the effect a little bit more. Another thing to look for is to have the foreground subject very crisply in focus so that you'll be able to cut it out easier when we do some masking inside of Photoshop. That'll also help to sell the effect a lot better. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to Unsplash, and I just did a search for jump. You can obviously do something other than jumping, but I think this will be a good example. And so you can see there's lots of different examples, and a lot of these, meet these two criteria. So like this one would be great, it has a lot of natural depth. So does that one. This one would be great too. This is the actual one I used, but I saw this one. I thought this would be a great one to try out for this tutorial. So we're going to go ahead and go with this one. Okay, so we're going to jump over to Photoshop, and now we're going to start with a new document, Command N on the keyboard. And for this one, I'm going to do 1080 by 1920 pixels, hit Create. And now we just need to bring in our image, and so I'm just going to drag this in from my Finder window, and then just scale it up to fill the frame, and frame it however I want. I think something like that will work pretty well. Okay, so now we need to start by isolating the subject here, and so there's a couple different ways you can go about that. Depending on the image, you can try going up to Select and then choosing Subject. And depending on the image, it might do a better job or not of actually selecting the subject. You can see in this example, it didn't do so great of a job at selecting too much, and so I don't think I want to do that. You can also grab the Magic Wand tool with W, and then you can start selecting the subject. That looks like it's doing it a bit better. It helps that this has some nice contrast between the dark leather jacket and the background, and so I think that's gonna work a little bit better. And so I'm just kind of getting a rough selection here. We're gonna go in and clean this up in a little bit because you do want to make a pretty decent selection. Okay, so once you kind of have it roughed out with your selection, you can go in, zoom in with Command plus, and we're just gonna start cleaning this up. And so with my Magic Wand tool selected, I'm going to use the either left bracket or right brackets to make my brush smaller or larger respectively. And so when you want to remove part of the selection, you can hold alternate and then just start clicking, and it'll start removing stuff. And the bigger your brush is, the more of a selection it's going to make. The smaller your brush is, the finer details you can do, and you can start adding to the selection, you can subtract, and so it's really just kind of a matter of finessing it, getting in there. Sometimes you have to zoom in really close and just make your brush really small and just really get some fine detail in there. And so I'm just going to go through and try to get this selection as good as I can. I'll do the speed up thing so you don't have to watch me do this. Okay, so once you have your selection made, sometimes you can go into Select and Mask just to kind of clean it up a little bit. I sometimes find it helpful to put this overlay on. You can kind of see exactly what needs to be cleaned up, what doesn't. You can see there's some of this haloing from this white around it, but I think for this effect it's not going to matter too much. You can definitely go in and clean all that up if you want to, using the same controls for the selection. But I think overall this can be pretty good. If you do want to clean it up just a little bit, you can try smoothing it out a little bit if you want to. Sometimes the black on white view also helps. You can kind of see exactly what's happening and what's not, and sometimes that can help you clean up different things too. And so sometimes this can be a helpful way just to make sure you're getting everything cleaned up. Sometimes you can go a little bit overboard with it. So you just kind of have to, figure out what you're wanting to do. And, I probably am going way more fine-tuned with this than I actually need to, but you can be a perfectionist if you want to. Okay, and you can see I might have missed that part right there, so I'm just gonna fill that in. This is sometimes where this can be really super helpful. And I might increase the contrast just to get kind of a really cleaner edge right there. And you can even shift it in if you want to make sure you get it right. But I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to output it to the selection, and I think that'll be pretty good. So let's hit OK. Okay, so now that we have that selected, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a mask out of this just by going down here and hitting the mask. And we're not going to actually be using this mask on this layer, but we are going to be using the mask, so it's sometimes helpful just to have it there. Okay, so now we need to create our depth map for this image. That's basically how Facebook interprets the depth, and so we're going to be using black to white values to indicate depth for Facebook. And so I'm going to temporarily disable this mask by holding Shift and clicking on that mask. So now let's go ahead and create a gradient for the background, and basically what we're going to do is imagine, this is our, well, I guess we don't have to imagine, this is kind of the background, it's out of focus. Whereas up here, it's more in focus. And so we're basically going to go from black to white up here, because what's black in our depth map is going to basically indicate what's in the background, and then what's white is going to indicate what's in the foreground. So let's grab the gradient tool by hitting G on the keyboard. And for the gradient editor, maybe we won't do pure black. Let's maybe put it kind of like at a mostly dark gray, something like that. Hit OK, and then let's not do pure white either. Let's maybe do kind of like that sort of gray right there. Hit OK. We need to make a new layer, and then we can just start dragging the gradient tool, and I think we want something like that except the opposite. I also want to make sure this is just set to linear, and so I'm just going to drag down from the top, basically going from the dark to the whites, and I think that'll work pretty well. All right, so now we also need to create a depth map for our foreground here. So let's command click on that mask right there, so that'll make the selection. We can create a new layer, G on the keyboard to bring up either the gradient tool or the paint bucket tool. If you don't have the paint bucket tool by default, you can just hit Shift G to kind of cycle through until you get the paint bucket tool. And then we want to set this to foreground, and then make sure that our foreground color is set to something like either pure white or close to it. Let's just do pure white, and we'll just paint inside of that. And then we can undo the selection. We can bring back our gradient. You can see we have our nice depth map going on here. And so that's pretty much going to be it. Now all we have to do is export out some PNGs. And so I'm going to disable the depth map. I might put those into a group, call this depth map, and then just temporarily disable that. We can get rid of the background here. And so now we need to just save a PNG of this background. So I'm going to do Command Shift Alt W to pull up Export as PNG. And so we can hit Export All, and I'm just going to put it into my folder here. I'm just going to call this 3D Facebook and hit Save. I guess I need to call it something else, so I'll call it Facebook 3D. Hit Save. It's going to save it. And then we're going to enable our depth map. Once again, Command Shift Alt W to pull up Export As. We'll do PNG again, hit Export All. We want to save it as the exact same name, just with depth at the end. So I'm going to do Facebook 3D, and then I'm going to do underscore depth. And so it's very important that you use the same name as your other image and then add underscore depth. That helps Facebook interpret the images that you upload. Then hit Save. It's going to export it, and now we're ready to jump over to Facebook. All right, so I'm going to go and add a new photo. So I'm just going to type into a regular post like I would, do photo video. Then I just need to search for those two photos that I just exported. And so Facebook 3D depth and Facebook 3D. Make sure they're both selected, hit open. It's going to add them here. And sometimes this can take a little bit to process, but you can see it's generating a 3D photo. This can take a little bit of time depending on what you have going on. but eventually you're going to get your 3D photo. And so now you can see we have that nice kind of depth going on there. It's pretty fun, and I kind of like it. You can see this is kind of one of the limitations of not having it with the 3D camera on your phone, is it doesn't really know what to do with the background behind the subject, and so you can see we're getting some like ghosting back there. And so this is sometimes where it can work better with more, non-distinct backgrounds, but it's still pretty cool, and so I think it's kind of fun. Okay, so that's the basic way in which you do this. Let's go ahead and add some text in there. So I'm going to jump back to Photoshop. I'm going to keep the depth map as I have there, and I'm just going to add some text in here. And so I'm going to just grab my text tool with T, just start typing in some text. I'm going to use titling Gothic FB Extended Black, and so I'm just going to do that joy thing again. So let's do J over here. Actually, let's just say up. I think that'll be fun. So we'll do a U here, and then duplicate that with Command J. We'll do P over here. So up. You can actually put this behind the subject if you want to. The only problem is it's going to start really distorting the text behind it, like it distorts the background behind the subject. And so that's just something to keep in mind if you do that, but you can do that if you want to. But I think I like that right there. So now what we want to do is group these together. I'm just going to call this text. And I might go ahead and, well, let's just leave out right there. I'm going to duplicate this and put it up in my depth map folder. Put it up above the gradient and below the foreground here. I'm going to enable that, and I want to change these to like a lighter gray. I don't want them to be the same as that white, just because if I make them a bit darker gray, when we get the depth, it's going to be behind the foreground a bit. And so I think that looks pretty good. And so we need to do the same process again. So I'm going to do Command-Shift-Alt-W, pull up that Export As window, go to Export As. I'm going to do the exact same naming conventions. So we'll do Facebook 3D. I'm just going to replace that. Hit Replace. And then once again, enable the depth map, Command-Alt-Shift-W. Hit Export All. And once again, very important to use the exact same name, but add underscore depth to the end of it. Hit Save. I'm going to replace that. All right, now I'm going to jump back to Facebook and create a new post. Once again, just hit Photo, Video. We're going to grab those two photos, add them here. It's going to interpret everything, create the 3D photo. Sometimes it can take a long time, sometimes it does it right away. And there we go, we have our text, we have our subject, we have a pretty cool look going on here. And so yeah, just like that, you can create 3D photos, and it's really super simple and easy to do. And so yeah, be sure to check it out because it's tons of fun to create these 3D photos, and you can do tons of creative things with it. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to do it inside of Photoshop. So check it out, have a lot of fun with it, and I will talk to you later.